We are not here by our choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
We are here because we had no other option.
Welcome to Bridges Not Walls podcast. This is a podcast by Young Lives in collaboration with Dari Dapo. My name is Zenwei. I'm gonna be the moderator today, and today we're really here to talk about a topic about refugees, and we want to explore it using stories and not just the mere understanding of the definition of the words, right? And today we have two really excellent guests with us today. We have Kalimah and we have Heidi with us today. And really, Kalimah has been here since 6 years old, right?
Yes.
And Heidi has been working with the refugee community since she was 17 and 18 even, right? So I think today I wanted to kind of hear from the stories, two different perspectives around this particular topic, right? Because personally, when I hear the word refugee, sometimes I hear it being used interchangeably with asylum seekers, migrants and things like that. And I recall that at one point I was a little bit confused in terms of like what do they mean and what are the differences as well, right? And obviously when we talk about the topic about refugees, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding. Sometimes people just don't hear about the stories enough, and which is why this podcast is important to hear from people like yourself, right? And as a start, maybe perhaps Kalima, you can do a brief introduction. And what does the word refugee mean to you over the years, right? Since you've been here since 6 years old as well.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Kalimah. I'm a Rohingya from Myanmar, and I've been here since 2011. And to be honest, when I came here, I don't know what is the term of refugee, and am I a refugee over here? And I just came here with my mother and brother to join my father, who had been here before us. He left me when I was 1 year old. So he came here for to seek safety. And okay, how do I introduce her as a refugee?
It's okay. I think and thank you so much for sharing that story, right? I mean, I am a young parent. I have a 2.5-year-old son, and when I hear stories like that nowadays, before I become a parent, it used to be that obviously I understand the story and the situation is a very sad one. But ever since I become a parent, I used to joke that any single story that involves parents and their children moves me very much, and I want to cry just like you did. So I first I want to thank you for sharing that as well, right? So you were saying that your father was here to seek safety, right?
Yes.
And and then you joined your family here.
Yes.
Okay.
At first, it was a mix of confusion to be here, and like hope also, like because our country wasn't safe enough for us to live there. Like we have no access to education, healthcare, and even freedom of movement. And from there on, since the country is literally like we can't even go out from the house, so my father decided to call us over here. And arriving here also, it was also like really like not easy for us, because it's come with new challenges, like no legal rights, limited no legal rights, and then limited access to all this thing as a being refugee over here, and a lot of uncertainty, I would say.
And I know that that is such a hard situation to be. I can only imagine what it's like to have those limitations. But I also hear that you are now here today, and you have also grown so much from from that situation to now also helping people that were in your that are in your situation and things like that. And you probably learn a lot from that as well. And if you think about today, what what does that word mean to you now? You mentioned that just now you're not sure what was it, right? And now what do you think it is?
I think it's the support I get from the local, especially it start from my school journey, and I have my teacher who always trusted in me and encouraged me. They didn't even like they always respect me as a refugee, and they never let me like feel like I don't belong over there. They make me feel safe, and then I learned, and I have this dream to contribute to my community. I want my community to be educated, since in Myanmar we never had access to education.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing that. And Heidi, like listening to these stories, it just reminds me of, the kind of situations that perhaps sometimes we just don't know what we don't know as well, right? So when you were, maybe do a brief introduction about the work that you do and tell us like what did you see when you were 17 and 18 years old, right? Because when I was 17 and 18 years old, frankly speaking, I was just playing Pokemon cards, I didn't know a lot of things beyond my circle and things like that. So what did you see, and what does the refugee word mean to you, right? Because there's so many different words that are being thrown around.
Yeah, so my journey really started at about 17 years old, right? I was fresh, ending secondary school, and about to start college soon when I was looking around for volunteering opportunities, and I was pointed to a refugee school in the heart of KL to teach English. At first, I thought, like, you know what, I'll just go in for teach for a bit and then start college after. But when I first started interacting with these children, they started inviting me back to their homes and telling me their stories. It dawned on me that these students that I was teaching were just a couple of years younger than me, but did not have access to basic human rights. They didn't have access to education. They didn't have. They feared for the safety of their parents, right? And I couldn't comprehend how kids that were just living 20, 30 minutes away from me did not have access to the same rights that I did. Something as simple to the rights of access to basic education was something that they were denied. Refuge refugees really started because 4 months into volunteering at a school, I was about to stop volunteering to pursue college at that point of time when I walked into the headmaster's office and I told him that like, hey, I need to focus on, college and university. Thank you so much for the opportunity to volunteer. If you need me to find a replacement, I can look for a replacement. And that's when he told me that the school will be shut down due to lack of funds. And then I was really perplexed. I mean, like, first of all, these kids did not even have access to formal education, right? It was informal learning centers. But what really inspired me was that, it was a tiny hall with 60 students. There was no proper classroom. Classrooms were divided by curtains. And yet these students showed up every single day just so enthusiastic about learning, right? The hunger to learn, the hunger to improve, the hunger to grow, and just the generosity in it all, right? I remember every time during lunchtime, about 1, 2 p.m., they'll break to go for lunch upstairs. And I'll stay downstairs, in school, while waiting for them to be done with lunch. And I'll always come down with food packed from home, right? Going like, oh, teacher, can I offer you some food? And that it really impacted me. I mean, how is it that people that were struggling and did not have much were so generous? And how could I learn from that, I guess? So at that point, when I think about the refugee community, I thought about what came to mind first was like, how is it that kids that were just a couple of years younger than me did not have access to the same rights and privileges that I did. And it was so perplexing, right? Because they did not choose to land in a situation like that. And now, 13, 14 years into the journey, I feel that the refugee definition has changed a lot for me. Right. I mean, yeah, it remains that refugees are people who had to flee the country due to war and persecution. But when I think about refugees, I think about some of the most resilient communities, some of the most loving, generous communities. And it makes me examine my heart, right? What am I doing with the access to resources that I have? What am I doing to the access to the privilege that I have, right? Because if a community that is struggling and going through a really hard time can amplify so much love for people around them, wanting to help out, wanting to, I often speak to the refugee community and they go like, oh, why is it that we can't donate blood? Is it because of our status? But the blood bank needs blood and we want to donate, and why can't we do that? Yeah, so I guess over years, yeah. Sorry, I kind of ended at a weird.
But what I'm hearing from you is that it is a community that really wanted to give, and the spirit of being resilient as well, right? Oftentimes, I think we hear about the things that is being very misunderstood, right? From a person that just consumes articles and media around, and even the comment section. You know how social media is, right? So negative and things like that. It always talks about things around like they're taking away our jobs. They are why aren't we helping our own people first? And things like that, right? So what you're sharing is something that we actually do not really see, and the stories that you tell as well, right? And it's a lot of times it's really around how do we go beyond the headlines, that the words that we read, right? And some people don't even read the articles, right? So I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to also kind of talk a little bit about, what are some of the things that actually you go through that perhaps you think that the average Malaysian actually do not realize, right? So we talk about the lack of access, we talk about the lack of rights and things like that. But sometimes, how does it really feel like growing up as you were growing up, right, with all these limitations involved, right?
And since I was in school, I understand that we have limitation in going to school. We can't go to government school, and it's been hard for me to find a proper school to study. And then back in 2021, only I joined Dignity, and at that time, due to my age, I couldn't join in secondary school because I had to end up in a program that for adult. Even though I'm 17 years old at that time, I had to end up over there. I truly understand because being a refugee here, that is the limitation. But I think being a refugee here hit me when my father was in hospital. He had cancer, and he had to go. The only way to him to recover from the cancer was do liver transplant. So when I always go with my father alone. So when it hits me was like when the doctor said that as a refugee you can't have transplant over here, and there is no other way. Yeah, and the doctor is like saying that it just like you just wait for the time.
That's the only way.
Yeah, that is the only way. He has only few months left.
I see. Right.
It took me quite a lot of days to explain this to my mom, who is at home, hoping that there is some way to get my father recover from this illness.
And you were 17 at that time?
At that time, I was 19 years
19,
old.
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's really something that we often forget, right? I think the closest example I can think of is like even in Malaysia, as Malaysians, for example, we sometimes face these kind of racial issues where we were told to go back to whichever ethnicity country that we were from. So, but similar to you, you grew up here, and I grew up here as well. And for those comments to really come out to say like, hey, you don't belong, and you have all this restriction and things like that, I do not relate to wherever you ask me to go back anymore, right? So this is where we are, right? So it's something that we oftentimes do not realize when we say those things, and and it's just really heartbreaking to kind of hear that. And what kind of helped you to kind of go through that phase? I'm just curious.
You mean like what?
Yeah, to go through all these different limitations, what helped you to kind of move to where you are today to
it's more on like that is something like I can't do anything about right now. So better focus on positive side of how I can contribute to my community. So I see more options. Like I started my internship, so in ICMC they works on XGBV, right? So from there on, I try to get the experience first, and then since I know that my community people are more facing SGBV, so I took that, and then I also like try to help in other side way, like how can I contribute them to, like I usually do what is it I will take these community people who cannot speak English or Malay to the hospital, clinic. So I try to fix that gap between my community and even to the doctor. So by translating for them.
Okay. So yeah, I mean it just sounds like like now Heidi, like more than 10 years into this, right? probably there's a lot of similar stories, so perhaps that are like this, right? What are you seeing that are really just misunderstood, right? And it just undeservingly misunderstood, and that this kind of what are some of the things that we're not seeing that is absolutely not true as well?
I think one of the biggest things that have been misunderstood is a lot of times people comment and say things like refugees are just here for a handout, right? They're here hoping to just receive support but not wanting to contribute. But I listen to stories like Kalimah's, right? And I'm so moved by just your heart, right, and your resilience that despite going through so much, you've said multiple times throughout this podcast already that I want to help my community, and you don't need to, right? A lot of times people go through really difficult circumstances and find a way, to secure your future. But you've chosen to, yeah, I need to protect myself first, right? But you've chosen, to go through the necessary trainings and internship to see how you can better serve and support your community. And I think that is one of the most inspiring things, right? So a lot of times Malaysians talk about how, I think one of the biggest myths and misconceptions is that refugees are here in Malaysia and they receive government support and UNHCR support. But that's the furthest from the truth, right? The only support that they receive, if it can be considered a support, is a UNHCR protection card for those that are legally registered with UNHCR. But this card that you are granted barely covers protection in any way, shape, or form, right? So I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions, that refugees are here and they receive government handouts and UNHCR handouts, and they're here, but they just want to receive. On the flip side, we've seen people like Kalimah, that you go out of your way to serve the community. And it can be difficult going to hospitals and negotiating with local doctors because, sometimes it's like even for NGOs, it's difficult, right? Going into hospitals and pleading doctors to that, like, hey, let me admit this asylum seeker that don't have a refugee card, right? So that can be really challenging. But throughout, the past 10 years of work and more, what we've really seen is how the refugee community really wants to give back. And we see, how, for example, the Somali community during the Putra Heights fire actually went out their way to cook hot meals to bring it to the hall to distribute that, right? But even during the floods, so many during the refugee community, we were at a peak of just coming out of COVID, and recovering from COVID when the really terrible floods hit, if you remember that, right? But the first group of people that actually started reaching out was the refugee community to go like, hey, we're not impacted, but how can we lend support? We can't drive cars, but we can pack clothes, we can organize things in a hall. I remember going to kampongs and neighborhoods to do massive cleanups and spring cleaning with the refugee community. And that's what I find really, really inspiring. The heart, whenever we speak to the community, is, despite the hardship here in Malaysia, despite the fear, the lack of documentation, the struggle, when we talk to refugees, it's often like, hey, they often respond by saying like, hey, I really love Malaysia. The people are great. We share so much values in common in terms of our hospitality and our generosity, and we want to give back to the country.
Yeah, I think, perhaps, what really, comes up from the story that you just told is really that they feel the limitation, and therefore the level of empathy for whenever the country hits by disasters or when someone is in need, right? They immediately know that, hey, I was there, I know how it feels like, and that's where the empathy comes from as well. And we oftentimes, as we were speaking from a position of privilege, we forgot what it's like. We've actually forgotten what it's like to really, be kind to one another and help out one another when, we took a lot of things for granted, right? You talk about like the lack of access to kind of like move around and things like that. I cannot imagine how that looks like, but I guess we can relate it to when during the pandemic, the time we were all stuck in our homes. Imagine living that for many years onwards, beyond the COVID times, right? So I think we just got to be able to kind of, humanize, and try to understand, if you are in that position, then what can we do, right? And it's what options do they have, right? And I think one of the misconception around, like, hey, they're here to kind of take our jobs, right? What do you think? What do you think about it, right? In terms of like, maybe we can start with you first, in terms of like, hey, they're here to kind of take our jobs and stuff like that.
So, first of all, we are not here by our choice.
Absolutely, yeah.
We are here because we had no other option. And we are not here to take your what is it? Your jobs, your country.
Yeah.
No, we are just here for a while. Maybe if we have a chance to go back to our country, yes, we would. But here, I think one thing I want to say to Malaysian that why don't there are so many refugees, they have skills, trained, why don't you make use of them?
Yeah.
And then also, right, we can learn from each other. And then
Yeah.
when we go back to our own countries, and then we can build our own community and we have our own country. And then
Yeah.
you will be like, it's like we learn from you.
Yeah.
The credit is going back to you.
It's a win-win situation, right?
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that, somebody wins and somebody lose, right? We can all benefit from this, right? So what I'm hearing from you is really that, hey, this world is big. We have, abundance of resources. If only we know how to be able to kind of share and to be able to optimize how we use it, right? Because clearly we are not perfect as well as a country, right? And what do you think about that?
I mean, the first thing I tell people is that refugees are not economic migrants, right? I think we need to be very clear on that because often the everyday Malaysian can get confused. I mean, just like how, how our country labels it all as party, right? Pendatang asing tanpa izin. Whether you're a refugee or you're a migrant, you're an asylum seeker, you're kind of all labeled under the same umbrella. But people first need to know why refugees are in the country. You didn't have a choice to flee.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have a choice. I mean,
The
it wasn't
word
your
is-
choice to flee, right? Yeah, it wasn't your choice to flee. And you don't plan your migration. You kind of basically have to pack up and run away overnight, right?
If you had a chance to even
Yeah, if you even have a chance to pack up, right? So I think, first of all, people need to understand that, because of that very reason, refugees are not here to take your jobs. And the refugee community offers a very different skill sets that often Malaysians might not have, right? For example, I mean, we live in a digital era, right? Where everything's online, we have options to work from home. But the refugee community come in, and they've got so much skills in agriculture, in farming, and their skills can really contribute to nation building. The truth is, our country is built on the hands of refugees and migrants, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, right? So refugees are not here to take our jobs. They're here to contribute to the country. They're here, to seek safety. And until it's safe to return, I feel like we should find a way to help them integrate here into the country because they have so much to contribute to building Malaysia for what it can be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think I was reading an article talking about how the foreign labor force is not anytime shrinking, right? In fact, we need more help, right? Because Malaysians are not taking up some jobs, right? Some type of jobs that they're just not willing, and we have to depend on foreign labor and things like that. And those are opportunities that if it's a situation where it's a win-win situation, I don't see why not as well, isn't it, right?
Yeah, but maybe I'll just also add on, right? A lot of times, I mean, when there is, our country is very dependent on foreign labor, but we've also been seeing waves of just brilliant brains coming our way, like amazing engineers, doctors, and I wonder what are we doing with refugees coming our way with such backgrounds and experience, because I feel like our hospitals can definitely do with more support, right? Every sector can do with more support. I feel that we should tap into what is coming our way to see how we can contribute to nation building together. Yeah.
What are some of the brilliant talents that you are seeing in your community that is beyond the typical physical labor type of work that we always see, right? What are some of the brilliant minds that you're seeing? People that with amazing skills. What are some people that you meet?
Specifically, if I go to my own community, they are good at farming and they know how to handle these plants, and then also they are good at cooking and what other like the women's are good at tailoring.
Yeah. So it's I think those skills are like, we talk about food security. We talk about like some of these skills where AI is funnily enough, AI is gonna disrupt a lot of the white collar work and the knowledge working work. And they're really talking about like, we need to go back into all these skilled places like tailoring and farming and things like that.
AI can't sew your clothes.
AI can't plant your food, man. Right? So I think that is really interesting, and I do think that one story that came to mind to me is like, maybe we don't even need to kind of go to very far places and talk about like people fleeing their country. Like a simple example would be like if you just imagine that there's a flood in Malaysia, for example, and there's an area that is absolutely flooded and they have to run away. Klang, for example, if it was majorly flooded at one point, right? That area itself would have different people of different skills. You have engineers, you have doctors, you have like people that works all walks of life, and they just needed to go to somewhere else. So if we just use that small little chasm to represent like what this whole different types of people that are coming, it's just as simple as that, right? Because there's no one single country that has only one type of talent, right? So they're just running away from a situation, and I think that's something that I think we can all appreciate, right? So moving forward, I think I think that I would wish that Malaysians can really, open up their perspective around like, hey, there are different areas, like it, be it digital or skilled, professionals. Those, we need to find areas to kind of help them so that we can help ourselves as well, right? That's one of the reasons why when we work with young lives, for example, we talk about the digital skills. We talk about, how do we actually get them ready for the digital age as well, right? So I guess maybe the question to you is around, what do you hope for the future to be like, right? What are your dreams for perhaps for yourself and also for your community?
I wish I think my dream would be like to have a safe and a secure future for my people, and I want my people to have this access to education and opportunities, and rather than seeing refugees as a burden, I want people to see them as a individual full of potential.
Okay. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. What about you? Yeah.
What's my dream for the refugee community?
Yeah, and how we Malaysians should look at this and how we can get involved as well, right?
Yeah. I think my dream is that we first start seeing refugees as people first, right? Beyond their status, beyond their labels, beyond the documentation. How do we first see them as people? People like you and I, with the same hopes, with the same dreams, with the same desire for a brighter future. I think, often there is so many, xenophobia is on a rise, right? Because we see people first for their labels. But we forget that, we bleed the same color, right? We're one and the same at the end of the day. We're just born into very different circumstances. That's not our choice. But I think that if we start seeing people, when we start seeing refugees as people first, and when we humanize their plight, I feel there's so much more we can do together, right? There's so much more we can do for each other. It's not just a one-way relationship. My hope is that we, beyond seeing refugees as people first, is that we learn to dignify their experience and their lived realities, right? How do we not treat them as victims of their circumstances, but how do we create platforms, for them to be able to speak up for themselves? I 100% believe in, being an ally and championing refugees, right? But more and more, with what Young Lives is doing or different organizations doing, right? I think we're all collectively taking a step back in leading the way by creating platforms for refugees to take lead, right? Because I do believe that is the future. Policies can't be made without being in consultation with the people that are most impacted by it. And so my hope is that as the government, whether is it in Malaysia or in countries of resettlement, continues shaping and forming policies that impact affected populations like the refugee community, my hope is that, we do a lot. We are very conscious in first consulting refugees and asylum seekers before we form policies.
Yeah. I think, from what I'm hearing from both of you, it's really inspiring, and of course it's also like it gives me a different level of realization and understanding of your story. And I think my wish is very similar to yours, but and very similar to yours as well, but in a very simple sentence is I just wish we talk to each other more.
Yeah.
I think that's just really it.
Yeah.
And to me, in terms of like just really sitting down here and talking to you and Heidi, I think it allows me to really know, what exactly where you are coming from.
Yeah.
What are you going through? And I think that's that's a very important lesson. I don't think we sit around enough at
Yeah.
the coffee shop or at the laundromat,
Yeah.
so what more, speaking to someone from a community that we
Yeah.
often do not interact with, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe, as we close this podcast, I was also thinking, like, if we want to get involved, right? If we feel inspired, we want to do something about it as well. How do we get involved, right? Anyone
Kalimah,
want
you
to
can
go
go
first?
first.
Okay, maybe you can say,
Yeah.
how can we get involved? If suddenly you meet somebody on the street and you tell them your story, I was like, man, I really want to help, and how can I do it?
I think first thing I would do is I will let the person meet my community people and then
That's
other
nice.
communities, because refugees are not only Rohingya. So then see, and we will try to access what they need according to the person's level. Yeah. And then see what are their needs, and I think that is how the person can contribute.
Yeah. Let's grab a meal together and get to know each other.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Heidi?
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, look up an organization, whether it's Young Lives or find an NGO to volunteer with. But make sure it's consistent, I think. What I always tell people is that when we do work with the community, whether it's volunteering or otherwise, there should be consistent, regular touch points, right? And not just a one-off volunteering. I think impact can only be made when we sit with communities and we build friendships that is long lasting. That's where real change can happen. Yeah. So look at an organization, find ways to volunteer, find ways to get involved. And a lot of times it doesn't need to be, a lot of times when people think, oh, I want to help a community, they think it's just money, right? And that's where they feel like, oh, I might not have the finances this season to support financially. But volunteering can happen in many different ways, whether is it through teaching, whether is it through connecting and supporting a family. A lot of times when we ask the community what they need, they often tell us, like, we actually just need a friend, right? We need a friend. We need a local person that stands by us, that supports us, that we can call when we run into trouble. We just need someone to talk to. And sometimes it's as simple as that, extending a friendship.
You're literally helping just by being you.
Yeah.
By being a local, by
Yeah.
being there to listen, by being there to, offer whatever you have, or, it doesn't matter how little or how much, right? It's just a matter of spending time and being yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. I want to thank you so much for telling me all your stories and sharing your perspective as well. I hope that this conversation is also, enjoyable for the both of you.
Most definitely.
So I want to thank you for listening to this very first episode of the podcast of Bridges Not Wall. Looking forward to the next episode. You can find us in, I guess, majority of the main platforms where you find your videos and your podcasts. And we'll see you next time. And thank you so much for coming.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for having us.